Okay, so in this example, we got 4 parts to it. I'm going to show you more technique. And in this example, right, not every question is X as a subject. So you got to be very mindful. So if you read the instruction, make the variable in the bracket the subject. So you got to be aware first. So in this case, right, I'm making capital A the subject. So my answer will look like this. And here in my answer, I shouldn't have any A. So you do need to check. Otherwise, right, the moment if your A is discovered in your answer, you got no marks anymore. Okay, and I also need to bring to your attention that in this topic, capital letter and small letter are two different things. Okay, so small a is small a, big A is big A. So they are two different things. You cannot take it as the other thing. Okay, so in this question, for part A, the subject is hidden in the bracket. So of course, I will need to expand out the bracket. Okay, so some students, right, they will be a bit mind blocked because of there's a half here. Okay, so you actually got two choices. So from here, right, you can multiply 2 on both sides. If you multiply 2 on both sides, it will look something like this. So if you multiply 2 on both sides, the fraction will disappear. So you multiply 2. So 2 times half half h a plus b. So it will disappear. So you can actually continue from there. Okay, so or we can go for cross multiplication. So I'm trying, let me write properly for you. Okay, so maybe I show you the multiply by 2 on both sides. So if I multiply by 2 on both sides, 2 times half, that will be a 1. So you'll be left with this. So when you're left with this, your A is in the bracket. So you can bring it over. You can bring it over. Sorry, you can expand out, kind of free up the subject. Okay, so you can expand out. Okay, as you expand out, right, you also be mindful of where is your subject. So some people, they need to highlight so that they are mindful about that. So in this case, your subject is there. So what you can do, you try to free it up, right? So you actually got to bring this over. So you can bring this over and you have a AH. So your subject is here. So remember, if your subject is what you want, so the next step is to get rid of H. So you can divide by H on both sides. So if you divide by H on both sides, you will have gotten your subject. So this is your answer. So this can be your answer. And if you do a check, you don't have an A. So this can be your answer. Okay, another way will be, like I mentioned just now, I can go for cross multiply. So if you look at the question, is half H A plus B. So how do I make it into a cross multiply? A is a A over 1. This whole thing will belong to the numerator. So some people, they prefer it this way. So they can go for cross multiply. And after that, subsequently, they open up, continue the same steps, continue to open up, and then continue to bring everything over. So you will still get the same answer. So that depends on how you want to see it. So you can multiply 2 on both sides in this case before you expand out, or you can go for the cross multiplication, which is a very common technique like I mentioned in example 1. So one of the common technique will be cross multiplication. Okay, so that is one thing. Okay, the next one, I'm supposed to make X a subject. Okay, so always remind yourself, when we want X a subject, your answer will look like this, and there shouldn't be any X. So I keep reminding you this because sometimes you will end up having your subject on the other side also. Okay, so your job is to isolate your subject. Okay, in this case, if you look, your subject is in the bracket and is outside the bracket. So anyway, the first instinct will be obviously go and expand out. Go and expand out. Okay, and then still be mindful about where is your x. So right now you got two terms that has x. Okay, so isolate your x first. Isolate your x by moving the unwanted term over. So sometimes at this stage, some people will be, so how do I continue from here? So another way, another technique that a lot of people will forget will be the take out common factor. Some students will forget, oh, there's such, you learn the method, but sometimes you will forget that you can actually do this method. Okay, so once you do a take out common factor, so this is a multiplication. You can divide both sides by a plus 1. So the next step, I'm going to divide both sides by a plus 1. And if you do a check here, you got no x. So your x is already the subject. So take out common factor is also a common technique. So expansion is a common technique. Cross multiply is a common technique. So make same denominator that we did in example 1 is also a technique. So all the algebra technique that you have learned will be a technique. Okay, so far, okay, have an idea first. Okay, before I go to more examples. So we come to part C. Part C, your job is to make X the subject. So if your job is to make X the subject, your answer should look like this, and there shouldn't be any X here. Okay, like I mentioned, cross multiply is a very common technique. So if you see a fraction like this, it should lead you for cross multiplication. It should lead you to cross multiplication. And when you focus on your subject, you realize that you got X on the left, you got X on the right. So you will need to gather every one of them on one side. But one of the X is hidden in the bracket. So logically speaking, you should just expand out. Then push all the X to one side. So there is an X here, there's an X here. So I will focus on pushing all the terms with X to one side. Okay, all the terms that doesn't have X, I will move it to the other side. So during this moving, a lot of people will make sign error. Those who are always very careless, they always make sign error during the shuffling. Okay, so sorry, this one is 3y. Okay, so you got to shuffle correctly. There's a chance for you to make careless mistake. And then after that, you observe where is your subject. So what do you do from here? So again, is your take out common factor. So during exam, right, this is one of the common technique that the setter or the exam question will like. Because most students, they will forget the technique of take out common factor and then the subsequent technique of dividing by the bracket. So a lot of students will forget this technique. So previously in part B, we got this technique. So right now in part C, we also got this technique. And at the end of it, you do a check. You don't see any X here. So this is the answer, and X is your subject. Okay, so far you come to cross multiply, you come to take out common factor. So very common one. Okay, so these are the few common technique, but a lot of time it depends on how the expression looks like. Okay, the next one we see fraction, and if you realize, U is the subject. So if you are getting U as a subject, so bear in mind U your answer will look like this, and you shouldn't have any U on this part. Okay, so if you look, where is your subject? Here. And you will see a fraction that doesn't contain the subject. So this is like, can be thrown over. So I'm going to throw it over. I'm going to throw the fraction that doesn't contain U. And right now, I got a fraction minus fraction. So your fraction technique comes in again. You need to make same denominator. You need to make same denominator so that you got a single fraction. So from a single fraction here, you can cross multiply. Cross multiply again, and you divide the bracket over. And you do a check. You got no U in your answer. Okay, so fraction technique, making same denominator. And again, we come back to cross multiply. Okay, so actually from here, right, there's also another technique. If you have a fraction equal to a fraction, you can do a reciprocal on both sides. So during the problem solving part, we also learned something about reciprocal. So reciprocal means you change the position of the numerator and the denominator. So actually I can reciprocal each side. Okay, I can do a reciprocal on the left and the reciprocal on the right. So for example, so I flip the position. So if I flip the position, I got U over 1. I can also flip the position. I got BF over B minus F. So I still end up with the same answer as the cross multiply answer. Okay, but this one you can only flip when there is one fraction on the left and one fraction on the right, not when you got two fractions on the right. So it only work for one fraction against one fraction. So I got to highlight you on this. Some students, right, they will just flip. They don't know what they are doing. So the condition for this to work is one fraction equal to one fraction. If it's not one fraction equal to one fraction, please don't do the reciprocal. Okay, so I hope you bear that in mind and don't do silly thing. Don't do silly thing like I show you an example. Huh? So for example, you got something like this. Okay, so those people who will just anyhow flip, right? This is what they do. They will flip like this. They will flip like this. They will flip like this. Then they will tell me that, oh, that's my X. Okay, so if you are doing this, okay, let me remind you, it's totally wrong. It's totally wrong. You don't flip two fractions on the right. Okay, the reciprocal idea is only meant for a single fraction on the left and a single fraction on the right. Okay, so please don't anyhow do. Sometimes for some of you, if your technique is not so strong, right, you tend to anyhow do. And then your answer is very, very different from the actual answer. So this topic kind of review how good your algebra technique is. Okay, so if your algebra technique is strong, right, this is a very simple thing. Otherwise, you'll find that every question looks so different. Okay, so make sure you have an idea of the subject. So if X is the subject, please make sure that you do not have X in your answer. Your subject cannot appear on the other side. Your subject can only appear on the left side. And so far, the technique that we have been using, very simple one like cross multiply, making same denominator, expanding out bracket is also a very common one. Okay, take out common factor and making same denominator. All these are not new to all of you. Okay, it's just that you got to get used to it by looking at the expression given to you. And of course, stay very focused. Sometimes you lose touch. You forgot what you're supposed to do. There are some students who even make the wrong subject. So for example, like this one, making X the subject, right? Some students will make something else the subject. Okay, or like this one is making U the subject. They may end up making V the subject. So it's all sorts of silly mistakes that can happen. Okay, so stay very focused. What are you supposed to do? You will find that it's just instinctively all the algebra technique will come in.